So, welcome to the show today. Today, I have Chi Nnadi on the show, and he's the founder and CEO of Sela Technologies. And I'm very excited to talk to you today, talk a little bit more about your story and some of the exciting stuff that you're up to. So, Chi, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for your time and the opportunity. Yeah.
So, let's talk a bit about your story. What are some of the most exciting moments or some of the most defining moments looking back that you feel really shaped you as a human being, that you really feel that shaped you as a leader and an entrepreneur?
Oh wow, that's a big question. Um, yeah. So my entrepreneurial journey is very much connected to my sense of family and legacy. And so when I was 25, 25, I was visiting home in Nigeria. My grandmother just passed, and I got malaria and I was sick. And we were in the village. We were in Ngwere, my village, and we're in my dad's house. And I got malaria and I was sick, and I was basically in bedridden for 4 days, a lot of sleeping. And this is the village. So at that time, there's power shortage because Nigeria is famous for not having power. And so we either had the generator going on during the night, but during the day when I was sleeping, the fan would move very, very slowly because we're using NEPA. So it's like basically you're just baking and sweating. And I just kept on going in and out of these fever dreams. And during the 4 days, I was reading this book, um, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And it's about this family over a span of 100 years, really all these wild characters. And during that time, my mother came into the room actually, and she had in her hands these photo albums of our family. And she just started telling me all these stories about my uncles, my grandfather. My grandfather was a very successful businessman and was a mayor of Port Harcourt, which was the largest city in Nigeria in the 60s when he was mayor, up until the Nigerian Civil War. And the Nigerian Civil War actually ended in our village when the Nigerian army chased my mother, his family into our village. And he actually went out and started the truce with the soldiers after he sent his 33 kids out into the forest. And so it was this weird fever dream of 4 days. The combination of the book I was reading, the combination of my mother telling me all these stories about our history and our past, and seeing all these pictures. And at that time, I had been living in Los Angeles, and I was very far away from my family. And it was one of those moments that looking back, you realize it's kind of an inflection point. You start thinking about yourself in the span of a cycle. Rather than just yourself as an individual and like what you want, what you care about. And maybe it's just growing up and that sort of thing. But you start thinking about your where you fit in a cycle, and that changes the way you think. And so that was the beginning. And now, if I look at where I'm sitting today and what we're doing today, everything is about understanding that you have a limited amount of time to contribute, and you're going to be held accountable by the future. And as to what you contributed in the cycle. Because in the same way, my mother's telling me stories about my grandfather, and everyone knows stories about him, the same will happen about me. And if I don't contribute anything, then, what was I there for, So fast forward to being in business school, and this is like a second moment, but these two are connected, and seeing the population explosion, the World Bank numbers, it was the World Bank population estimates that come out for all the way up to 2050, 2100, and seeing the Nigerian numbers and seeing how we were going to go from 180 million to 400 million by 2050 and become the third largest country in the world, and then over 700 million by the end of the century. And realizing that, I have a lot of cousins. My grandfather had 33 kids. So a lot of cousins, but most of them are younger than I am. And realizing that the current structure of Nigeria, especially, is not, no one's thinking about that future. No one's prepared for it. No one's thinking about education. No one's thinking about building a society. I mean, it's like, what's going to happen to them? You know, the people who are end up going to be telling your story and such. So it just made me realize that my role, and it's interesting to realize your role in a span of time, you know, that my role was actually to create a foundation for other people to stand on. And it's one of those things that I think when I get older, I'll be like, wow, that was really deep. But like, it's just something you just thought of and you're like, yeah. But the older you get, the more you're like, that was an important moment. That realization that you're a foundation. I mean, I don't have any children yet. And, you know, and I'm sure it'll be one of those things that become a more deeper realization as I get older, you know? Yeah.
These are really powerful moments. Thank you for sharing that, because it is deep stuff, you know, and it's really powerful. And I'm really interested in how it relates to the why behind everything you're doing. I mean, you've been up to some really interesting things. Maybe you can just quickly give a bit of context about you know, the last 10 years or so on the project that you spent on in, you know, invested in Nigeria, and then also on Sela now, and in the context of sort of like why you're doing what you're doing, why you're doing this basically.
Well, it's really thinking about where are you of most use. And I remember, so we started that year, that Christmas actually, when I was sick, my family started a nonprofit called Grace Center, named after, because my grandmother passed that year, named after her. And it was only for our village actually, because my parents literally grew up in the same village. And it was to help the elderly women be able to subsist for themselves so that they're not living off of handouts. And so basically taking the skills that they have in sewing and helping them actually take it to market and become entrepreneurs themselves. So bringing sewing machines and, you know, doctor exams and such, eye doctor exams. And I decided to help my family with that. But then it really grew because I started to think about, you know, my own contribution and thinking about Nigeria as a whole. And being that the Niger Delta is the region where I'm from, and what my grandfather meant to the region before, and that war, the Biafran War, ushered in oil exploration, and just knowing that it was that there's almost like a symmetry to life, and thinking that, okay, this is the original sin of the country, the deep psychic wound. And my parents are actually environmental engineers. So in 2010, my mother, when the BP oil spill happened, my mother was a professor at the University of Central Florida. And so she started a task force actually to find better solutions to clean oil spills, because she remembered, you know, back home. And she found this organic biotechnology that could clean up oil in 30 days. At that point, it was a really large innovation, and was organic and was liquid and could be applied by anybody who could hold a hose. So I saw that with the experience of working on our nonprofit for the previous 3 years, and I was like, this is it. Let's take this home. Let's clean up the Delta. Like, this is going to beat the resource curse. You know what I mean? One of those things where you just learn what the resource curse is, and then you say, okay, of course, we're going to go solve that now. And so it was a lot of youthful idealism. And so I went back to Nigeria. I'd been going back and forth between Nigeria and Los Angeles. Went back to Nigeria, met with a lot of politicians, and I thought this was going to be easy. Just give them the technological solution, and they're just going to solve it. And that didn't happen. They laughed at me, told me to go back home as an environmentalist from California, because, you know, I still, even when I drop into my Niger accent, I still, you know, sound like what is called an Oibo, which is a white person. But they laughed at me. At that time, oil price was very, very high. So there weren't any incentives. And then I left, and as I was leaving, I turned to my brother who was working with me, and I said, this is not going to happen. No one's going to care about this until some international organization like the UN shines a light on this. And I did not know this at the time, but the UN had been doing a study at that moment in the Niger Delta, and a report came out within a year. and tasking Shell to create a fund for 1 billion to solve the problem. So suddenly you had a market, and all these politicians are not calling you to come back. At that time, I was at business school, and so I was like, all right, let's go back, let's do this. Primarily because you're always looking at where can you be of most use, and you're willing to take the risk because we can always go back and work at Google. That's always there. We can always go back and work at McKinsey or Goldman. Like, that's always there. But to go and use up your youth and your, fervor and stubbornness, I guess you could say, that's where I saw the opportunity. And so I went back, and it was a journey for since 2013, a journey really getting to know all the stakeholders of society, really getting to know the local people. That was easier because of the familial relationships that I had that allowed me to go into communities that no Nigerian can go into these communities. I mean, my own uncles thought I was crazy for going to these communities. Like, they don't go there themselves, and they live an hour away, But then at the same time, a family friend is an executive at Shell, staying on the Shell compound whenever I'm visiting Nigeria, literally living on both sides of the equation every single trip. And then being able to meet politicians, then being able to meet business leaders, totally understanding the context and understanding the incentives of all the different actors. And then when I looked at that UN report, I kept on going back to it and going back to it. The milestones that were asked, the cleanup that involved the local people with real-time monitoring, transparent payments, because of, hundreds of millions of dollars have just been lost in the Niger Delta. And a healthcare database created of all the affected communities, education programs. I just saw all these things, all these milestones, and I knew that the society did not have would not be able to organize themselves to actually complete these. And by setting such high milestones, it almost made it so that the project would never happen. And that really fired me up. And so I just was a Gordian knot that I have to solve. And so I just started to look, and over that time, I started to see how technology was actually affecting the minds of the local people, and how because this is like a really important piece. When you've gone through that many decades of being hidden and kind of abused, you don't know what you deserve. And it's amazing what Facebook and the cell phone has done as far as bringing in new information. And now suddenly young men or young women are demanding more. And so realizing that if you could connect the person individually, not let's give the capital to the community leaders, person individually to the capital, or even when I say person individually, doesn't necessarily have to mean the guy that is working on the spill, who's a day laborer. It could also mean an environmental rights activist who's a community organizer. Connecting them to the capital, then we could actually solve the problem. One of the real hurdles is capital, people, all the benefits at this point, because of the decades of abuse, can't even actually physically enter the communities. So that's where we got. So it started with phones, and then we got to blockchain, realizing that money is now data. Money is not physical anymore. That's a game changer. That's an absolute game changer, and it's it's almost like the trap door in the problem, because now you can get capital in without having to deal with the hierarchical structures, and you can start presenting value to people who merit it. So that's the journey that we've been on, and it was out of the exploration with Sustainability International and working with the communities, and really raising awareness about it, that Sela was born, and the Sela that use case of the Niger Delta ends up becoming kind of like the birth. It's the birth of Sela, but also it's actually our sandbox to continue iterating and working even as we do projects in other parts of Africa, because it's such a difficult, high bar, high friction environment, and that it's actually fun to innovate in that environment and then take your innovation and then send it somewhere with actually less friction.
Very powerful. Thank you for sharing that journey, because I mean, sort of like the essence of what I understood is that with sustainability international, this was really the catalyst for Sela, because you understood that what you've done there can be multiplied by setting the foundation of what you basically realized back at our business school. By setting the right foundation, these projects can be multiplied many, 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 many times. And that is so incredibly powerful. And I want to just quickly go into one specific area about Sela. Tell me again, where does the name come from? Sela.
So Sela is the name of my goddaughter, my brother's daughter, who was born 3 months before the company was officially formed. And it's ironic. We were in the Niger Delta shooting the first ever 360 film in Nigeria with Al Jazeera about the Niger Delta. It's called Oil in Our Creeks. And it was morning, everybody's having breakfast. And I spent this is funny because this is actually the week Sela hadn't been named yet. And this is actually the week that May of 2017, when crypto was going crazy. And we're in the middle of the bush. And I'm sitting there trying to think of a name for Sela. And I'm sitting there at breakfast, and the Al Jazeera team, my mother's there, my team is there, and everyone starts throwing out names. And then my mother, of course, is throwing out names of her grandkids, and I'm not listening. And then I hear Sela, who is the newest one. And I was like, that's it, without even connecting that it was my brother Eze's daughter. Literally until 5 minutes later, because it just sounded perfect. And so in a way, my mom got what she wants. It kind of takes everything back to family. And if it had been presented to me as name it after your brother's daughter, I'd be like, but I just heard it and it was perfect. And then come to find out that Sela actually means, and I'll admit to this, I didn't know. Sela comes from the ancient Hebrew word, and it means foundation or rock. And I was like, oh, well, that's great. That works out. So
that fits pretty well. This is amazing. I'm always, I mean, on one side, I wanted to hear it again because it's so connected to family, and it's so much rooted in your DNA, which is a lot about family. And on the other side, you know, it's about that intuition, because it's like you said before, you know, you heard about this organic solution to clean up the oil spill, and you were like, done, take it back to it. You know, this instinct was there, and you picked on it and you went with it, and you didn't question it. You just went with it because you knew it's right. And you know, with the other things that you mentioned as well in the process, you heard something, you understood something, you got something, and you were like, that's it, and you took it and you run with it. And I think that's a big part of your success secret, your secret sauce, because there's not many people out there who can do it, not because they don't have the skill or they're not born with it. We're all born with that, but we hide it. We bury it underneath all those, you know, levels and masks and all those kinds of things. So this is very inspiring, you know, to hear how you're able to intuitively see something and have the confidence to just pick it and run with it. And I know it's not as simple as it sounds. Of course, it never is. But it's just something that comes out again and again and again in the story. So I just wanted to point it out. I think it's really, really important. So another thing I want to talk about briefly is, so you've built this organization, Sustainable International, before. Now you're building Sela. You've been building amazing teams all across the globe. which doesn't make it easy, but that's the way it is. So you're in the US, you're in Nigeria, you're in Switzerland as well, and probably in some other places around the world. And this is not going to be less and less. This is going to be more and more. And what I'm really interested in when it comes to entrepreneurship or leadership or whatever you want to call it is, how do you bring the right people on board? So do you just pick them from business schools? Do you just write job ads? Do you just say, hey, I got a job for you. This is how much we pay. Come on board. How do you get people to join that mission? Because let's be honest, it's ways more than a company. What you have is a mission. So how do you get people to join something like that?
Um, I mean, I have to say some of it is just luck of kind of thinking. Like I remember around the same, about a month, 2 months before when Sela was named, I remember talking to a friend. He's like, okay, you need a CTO. And I was like, you need a CTO. So you just kind of like, okay, I need a CTO. And then through a string of, it's actually really just luck. I went to advise a friend of a friend on doing a market entry into Africa for their AI startup, AI healthcare startup, and in SF. And after helping him out for a couple hours, he said, okay, what do you do? And then I started telling him about what I was doing. And he's like, oh, you got to meet this kid that I know. And then because he had just left MIT to work on a startup, and I met with our current CTO Hassan, but I met with 5 other kids from MIT, and you just going off of your instincts. I think one thing that's been very helpful for me to develop is trying to understand why people are are attracted to the opportunity, because like trying to find out their why, because I've been fortunate to attract people to the opportunity, but if they don't have the right why, it won't last. It will fall off, and because in the end, when you're building this something like this, co-leadership is a really important part of the process. Perhaps my job is really just to organize the people and have the inspiration, but then you need all these other folks who are just as fired up as you are, especially early on. So their why has to be very strong, and really just looking around and trying to looking around at people that I know, and trying to understand what their not only their why for joining Sela, but what they're seeking in life. That's a big part of it. Like, for example, our COO, Julie, she's not Nigerian, she's not from Africa, but from knowing her as a friend, I'm like, okay, she's seeking a tribe, and so and then that actually helps you understand, because our platform actually connects people like impact investors with the diaspora and such. And it's the same as when you're looking at investors, understanding why they're interested in Sela, and like intrinsically down to the person. So that impact investor from San Francisco might feel that the world that he or she is living in is highly disconnected and isolated. And what they're attracted to is an opportunity to connect with someone and help on the other side of the world, and help build something beautiful and feel connected to some sort of values that they share. And just, I think, understanding someone's why, whether they're a new coworker or a new investor for their life, that's been what's really driving them in their life. Because you're going to walk this path with them. And I've just been fortunate to it's kind of like a filter. You attract people, and then you just kind of understand what they're about, and then also get on the plane and go see them. That's I'm a big believer in that. I'm a big believer, if I believe someone is going to be important for this team, wherever I am, if I'm in LA, if I'm in New York, if I'm in Lagos, get on the plane and go see them. And Hassan always marvels that I got on the plane and went to see him at in Pittsburgh at Uber, Advanced Technologies Group. And he always says, he's like, he just showed up in Pittsburgh. I was like, yeah, exactly, of course. We had a few calls, and I was like, come on, we're doing this, you know. So I'm a big believer in going the extra mile if you really want to have that person be part of your team.
This is really powerful, especially, I mean, the one thing that you mentioned is actually going and seeing that, because it's a commitment that you make, you know. It's it's a commitment that from your side where you say, okay, I want this, you know, that's huge. And the other thing is aligning the opportunity with people's life goals. And this is way bigger than what we usually talk about. You know, we talk about people's career goals, aligning it with the opportunity and stuff like that. That's nice. But what's ultimately driving people are their ambitions in life, in overall. And if you can have a place where it's deeper than just, well, somebody wants to climb the ladder, somebody wants to make a name of themselves or whatever, you know. If it's bigger than that, if it's about them as a human being, then you got an opportunity that is not going to be a job, but it's actually going to be a vehicle that allows them to fulfill the mission of their life. And that is, you know, it's invaluable, because there's no such thing as loyalty to a company anymore. That's dead. You know, that's nobody's loyal to a company, because a company, we understand the company is basically nothing but, you know, a shell, a construct, nothing else. You know, what makes a company great is the people. So what we are loyal to are, you know, people, teams, a mission, a cause. And what this allows you to do is, you know, sort of like take the company or the organizational shell, the emptiness out of the picture, and attach people's loyalty to actually what matters, you know, to a cause, to something bigger than themselves. And that is huge. So I really appreciate, you know, sharing this. Now, the last question that I have is the rocking chair question. So let's go a little bit into the future and say, okay, now you're 80 years old and sitting on your rocking chair and looking, you know, outside of the window or whatever you're doing at that time. And you look back at your life, and let's say you have children, and your grandchildren are coming up to you and say, so tell me a bit about, you know, your life. What are some of the most important things that that you have created, or that has been enabled because of the work that you've done in the world?
Thanks. Mm, well, I think that, I mean, it's really hard to think that far out. It's like you're just living your life and gaining some wisdom, and now you're talking about another 40 something years of wisdom, and then I'm supposed to answer from that perspective. That's tough. That's not easy. So it's any way I answer this question, it'll still be juvenile to what the actual reality will actually be, right? But from where I sit, I think that I see life as and this might be because my undergraduate degree was actually in theater and film. So I was trained first as an artist before being a businessman. And I see life as an expression. Your body wastes, and your mind wastes. And then the question is, what have you expressed in that time? And a lot of times when an expression is really just telling your own truth. And so I grew up in many different cultures. I was born in the US, and I went back to Nigeria when I was 8 months old, and came to Canada when I was 7. Lived in Canada for my childhood, then went to Florida, which is very different from Canada. And then went to California. You know, they're all very different. And I think one of the things that I seek to do is and I see in the future, is to help people understand that despite whatever economic place that they're at, that people actually usually have more in common with people have more to offer to each other when they come from extremes. Because I've lived in so many extremes. And so even today, seeing how for example, the different parts of our team interact and how they change. Oh man, this is the best part. How they like change each other, you know, and make each other better, coming from their total different backgrounds. Like I'll give you an example. Our COO sat and we had a circle. We were meeting with a bunch of folks last Friday night to discuss the future, blockchain, that sort of thing. And we sat in a circle. This is in Lagos, and we started talking, and we had pizza and wine and beer, and we talked. Started at 7 p.m. and talked to 1 a.m. And because that's what Africans do, you know what I mean? Like you sit around in a circle and you talk, and because you know sometimes you don't have power, even if that's just so ingrained, you know, what we're even like before going back hundreds of years. And afterwards, our COO, Julie, she was beaming and she confided in me and she's like, it was amazing. We just all sat down in a circle and just talked and hung out. And it was so much fun. And it dawned on me, I was like, wow, like this basic thing is of so much value to her because she's living in San Francisco where everybody's in their phones and their mission and on their way. And I was like, and it was, you could see it like a new part of her brain being formed. And in the same way, the flip side, our engineers, all of our engineers are very young because nobody really started coding in Lagos or Nigeria really until Andela arrived. Everybody has gone through that process. So everyone is, you know, the popularity of being a software developer is only about 4 or 5 years old. So everyone's self-taught. And they all have a story of how they were doing one thing and they discovered computer science and they discovered the ability to think with logic and how one of them, Ibrahim was saying this, how he gets so much pride in it because he knows that he thinks differently than the other guys around him. If there's a problem, he's going to think about it differently. He knows his mind has literally developed more. And this is a 21, 22-year-old kid. And to see like how that, and then, you know, how that is affecting them. So I want to be 80 and look back and see how these little things that have started have literally changed how people think and act. And I think I mean, this is already going to happen, but if I could be part of that, that's it. Because I remember Nigeria in the 90s when we had, you know, dictators and, you know, Ken Saro-Wiwa was murdered. And I mean, a lot of corruption obviously is still there, but I mean, Africa in the 90s was very tough. And so if I'll be able to see that growth, that's it. That's everything, you know?
I love that. I love what you said about that. You know, on the one side about the expression, life is about expression from your own sort of like background and everything. And also that story with, you know, the American woman, your COO, being in that circle and being of so much value. And you probably never would have understood if somebody told you that, you know, if somebody told you that, you would have gone, maybe, you know, but seeing that and her coming up to you and saying that, you were able to understand, wow, this is huge, you know, because this is how you grew up, you know, this is not something new for you, right? But for most people around the world, especially in our Western world, this is like, you know, this is like totally new, so to say, for us.
Yeah.
And this is really powerful. So really appreciate you know, sharing that. So what we're going to do is below the video, we're going to link to some sources like the company page, to the LinkedIn profile, so people can stay in touch, you know, follow what's most exciting stuff that you're up to, and keep in touch on that way. But then also connect with you, of course, about any kind of opportunity that comes up, whatever that may be, you know, talent, investments, partnerships, whatever is coming up there. So thank you so much, Chi, for sharing your inspiring story and being on the show.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity, Dana.